He is the author of NBA 75, The Definitive History. We now welcome Dave Zarum onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Dave?
It's going great. How are you?
Really good, man. Thanks for joining the show. So I'll start off with just a basic question. What was your motivation for creating the book? It just seems like a vast, just like massive undertaking. The NBA is just like a massive universe. So what was the motivation for creating this book?
Yeah, pretty quickly I realized that I was diving into a bigger endeavor than maybe I initially anticipated. But essentially, I mean, the publishing company had reached out to me. You know, they had done a previous book similar to this with the NHL, and it was to celebrate, I think, the NHL's 100th anniversary. So then to celebrate the NBA's 75th anniversary coming up, the idea came about to do a similar book. I leapt at the opportunity. I mean, I've always looked for any kind of way to tie in NBA history, hoops history to any work I was doing, whether it was covering the Raptors in a kind of a beat capacity or writing magazine profiles, whatever I was doing. You know, I was always tried to get that history angle in there. That was always what kind of I was most interested in. So to have the chance to write a book spanning the NBA's history, I mean, it was a good dream. It was, like I said, a no-brainer.
Was there any surprises that you came across in the book that you were like, man, I didn't expect this when doing your research, or anything that was just that you wouldn't think when you were writing this book? Anything that surprised you or shocked you at all?
You know, I'll try to find something specific. The cop out answer is a lot. The way I went about it was started off with, so the gimmick of the book for people who haven't checked it out yet is NBA 75. It's one story for each year, spanning 75 years of NBA history. So the kind of first step was to figure out, you know, which 75 stories are we going to tell? You know, which story from each year stands out the most and whatnot. And from there, when you start diving into those particular stories, after that list was kind of locked in, within there, you know, I had an idea of what the story was going in, obviously, because I put it on that list. But in a lot of cases, I maybe didn't know quite the depths of how intense some of these players' personal stories were in some cases. You know, Dr. J comes to mind. I had known a ton about Dr. J, the player. I had known a little bit about Dr. J, the person. And while putting together the chapter that kind of serves as a profile on him, learned a lot about his family's background, dealing with his brother's illness and whatnot. Just things about him that were going on in the background that I had no idea about. I think a lot of basketball fans probably weren't aware of and aren't aware of. So in every chapter, there were little tidbits like that kind of got uncovered. And in a big picture way, you know, I'm trying to think of the best way to say, like, one of the things that really stood out was the degree to which this kind of background of the fight against racism, the fight against prejudice, how that was present, obviously in the earliest days. You're talking about a league that started in 46 as an all-white league, and it was not the smoothest transition to becoming an integrated league. You know, there was even towards like the first crop of NBA players were, or not mainly, but predominantly, like, Jewish American players. And there was a ton of shit that was thrown their way right from the earliest day. And then to be able to draw that through line all the way up to today, you know, things like the dress code, you know, the chapter on Allen Iverson certainly dives into a lot of the ways these kind of not storylines, these kind of issues resurface over the years. And that really surprised me. I didn't anticipate the degree to which that garbage kind of was there at the beginning and has continued in the background all the way until today, obviously.
Since you bring that up, what was your thoughts with the bubble? Because that was front and center with social justice. So you're doing this research, and then the bubble happens. What was kind of your thoughts in terms of kind of the George Floyd and social justice movement with not only the NBA but the WNBA too as a collective? Because I think you saw one league, it's the WNBA, be unified, whereas the NBA, there is conflicting voices as to what to do. So what were your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, all I was thinking as the whole thing was unfolding, all I was thinking was like, there's precedent for this in a way. You know, we've seen these players, NBA players, have to come together and deal with these kind of issues before, and here we are. Like I said, just kind of being stunned, to be honest, almost like speechless that, like, here we are, 2020 at the time, and we're still having, those players are still having those same conversations huddled in locker rooms or in conference rooms, as was the case in the bubble. So that's what I was thinking. The way when the book came out, we do have a little bit about the bubble in the book, but because of the timing, the bubble hadn't started by the time this book was out, or by the time it was sent to printers, or whatever the case was. So the other thing I was thinking was I would have loved to have a chapter on the bubble. And this is like a huge moment in NBA history. It would absolutely deserve its own chapter. Like, I recently found out that we'll be doing a paper book version of this that will come out next fall with a couple updated chapters, and one of them is going to be on the bubble. So I'm excited to be able to kind of dive into this a little further.
So myself and my co-hosts, we've interviewed other journalists, and we've asked them about like their experiences covering the NBA. So I'll ask you this same question in terms of during the pandemic. What was it like covering the league during that time? And then also, what is it like now in terms of you as a journalist, in terms of things are opening up again? It seems like, despite the Delta variants, so far, if things go stay as status quo, there'll be fans and hopefully media access. A lot of the journalists were concerned that some of the restrictions that or existed during the pandemic could stay around, like the Zoom press conferences, the lack of locker room access. Are you concerned that that could be a trend even if the pandemic happens to be remedied?
I think it was already there before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think the pandemic gave players a perfect opportunity to kind of like double down on let's call it restricted access. But I've seen it, throughout the course of my career over the last 10 years, a pretty dramatic change. I can't even imagine, had I been around longer, 20, 30 years, how much more access you would have had back then. But even in my time in this industry, like I said, about 12 years or so, when I first started, granted, the Toronto Raptors weren't a very good team, not as popular, but like I got access, when I was doing stories on these guys. I would spend the day with them. I'd go to practice when no one else was there. Whatever. I got access. I got time with the players and the coaches and whoever. And I just, even the last few years, I've seen that completely go away. I mean, there'll be the odd exception, where maybe that'll happen. But for the most part, that's the biggest change I've seen is just a lack of like real time with players. A lot more scrums, which, not a fan of the scrum. The scrum is the enemy of good journalism in a lot of cases. Now they're all scrums, all on Zoom. There's obviously you might be able to get lucky and get someone on their cell phone or get a line into somebody. But for the most part, that like real access. And again, I'm coming from a place of someone who, let's say, like a feature writer. More profile writing, that kind of approach. Where you need time and access to players, and I did a story on Kawhi Leonard, big profile on Kawhi Leonard in a magazine up here in Canada, right when he came to the Raptors. And I mean, if that were a few years earlier, I know Kawhi's a special case, but I probably would have gotten a little more time with him and end up getting like 10 minutes to do all my research around it, and then get my brief window of time with Kawhi to go and write this like 4,000 word profile. So it's a different environment, man. It's just completely different, and I think it's just going to keep going in that direction.
Did you observe?
I just want to say, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. It's a bad thing for people who like that kind of reading, that kind of writing. For writers like myself who enjoy it, but like, who am I to say that these guys should spend time with writers like me or journalists? To put myself in my shoes, I would probably want to do one Zoom meeting and get it all over with as well.
So, what do you think changed? Did you observe any of the changes writing the book in terms of the players trusting the media more in terms of telling their stories, and how much do you think social media has been like a game changer in terms of players having the access to tell their own stories, as well as the Players Tribune, and well as other visual mediums where they can control their own narrative instead of just eliminating the journalists, and they can control that narrative. And like you said, I don't think it's necessarily it's a bummer because the players are biased. They want to tell their story from their perspective.
Of course. Yeah.
We don't get like the full picture, but at the same time, it kind of works both ways. Did you observe that when you were covering these stories, perhaps in years prior, before social media, that players felt easier talking to the media or telling their stories? Did you see any of that?
Yeah, Justin, I think you nailed it, man. I think you nailed it. It's obviously before, for a player to participate in a story, agree to do a story, they had their motivations. Sometimes they didn't, which is great. But I mean, like, yeah, it's viewed as like a way to get their voice out necessarily, and you as the writer, it's up to you to kind of not filter that voice, but verify that voice. You know, like present that, but also present the full story and where it's applicable. You know, whatever. Now guys can just tell their side of the story and only their side of the story, and they put it up on their social media channels. It gets exposed to just as many people, if not more, than the magazine article, you know, would have. And yeah, it's been a total game changer. Guys have control over their narratives, so to speak, and you know, which is a good thing. And I guess it's not surprising to see why people would be more players, personnel would be leaning towards kind of putting their own message out and kind of skipping the middleman in a sense.
I want to shift gears and talk about your book again. And I want to ask you, before writing the book, did you have, I want to ask first, I guess how I'm trying to phrase this question. Basically, what was your favorite period in the NBA? And did that change while writing the book at all?
I wouldn't say it changed. You know, my favorite period, first of all, like for nostalgic personal reasons, like the late '90s NBA, early 2000s NBA. That's like the climate where I really kind of grew up in the league. I'm 35 right now, so I have a natural tie to there. You know, that's where like you know all the players so intimately. But that being said, I was always so drawn to 70s NBA and 60s NBA. In particular, I'd say like what you would call like the heyday of the NBA, the period from, let's say, 59 to 72, when all these kind of mythical figures seem to come through the league. You know, Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain, Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor. You know, those are guys who I grew up reading about. Eventually, like when YouTube started getting more popular, you could find more and more clips of them. You know, I would devour documentaries, anything I could find on that stuff. I'm not sure why. I was always really intrigued by it. I guess it was the notion of like watching the first like version 1.0 of something that's to come. You know, I was really drawn by that. Plus the landscape of being a pro athlete at that time was just completely different. You know, they may have been like celebrities to some degree, but it's just like what they went through was just so much more intense, so much more real than maybe a lot of players now might be going through. But yeah, I'd say that that 60s decade was chock full of the players who I kind of idolize. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I feel you on like the early 90s, early 2000s. I think that's kind of a special place in my heart.
Yeah.
And
I was a Vince Carter guy as
gotcha.
as like a teenager. Let's put it that way.
I think, of course, I'm an MJ guy. Also, Allen Iverson, just kind of his style as well. But Vince Carter too. That 2000 slam dunk contest, very iconic.
To this day, Justin, the coolest thing for me, the coolest thing I've worked on. This book was awesome. I had a blast. I love it. But I did an oral history on the 2000 slam dunk contest.
Oh, really?
And I spoke to Vince about it. Yeah. And who knows how many times he's had to talk about that thing. But I got a call from him like around like I think it was like the day before Christmas one year, and like we talked about it for like 2.5 hours. It was nuts. He broke down the entire thing. It was that's the coolest thing I've been a part of. Coolest project I've been a part of by far.
The electricity of watching that I've never felt in any other sporting events.
Yeah,
it was kind of hard to explain. See, I'm trying to think. I'm like a freshman in high school at the time, and just watching it on TV, just the anticipation of what he's going to do. I've never seen anything like it. It was such an incredible performance. And since you bring that up, I think now the slam dunk contest gets a bad rap, and there's always like some kind of controversy, and there's just a lot of drama behind it. But for those, because I mean, it's weird. Like both of us are the same age, 35. There's a lot of like kids that they never even heard of that slam dunk contest, possibly, or don't know the significance.
Maybe, yeah.
So since you brought that up, can you kind of take us back in time during that slam dunk contest? Why is it so significant, and why, like, if there's like, I don't know, like a 12-year-old or something watching this now that's like 2000 slam dunk contest, why would I want to watch that? Excuse me. Why is that so important? Like,
I think part of it is he was legitimately doing stuff that you hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
And I think that's like true to a degree, but I think the dunkers today, I still get up for the slam dunk contest every year, and I usually walk away somewhat disappointed because I'm waiting for like that next Vince moment, right? And
Yeah.
it's happened. It's happened a few times, like Jason Richardson that one year, that was amazing. Dwight Howard had his moments. I mean, it's happened, but yeah, I think he was doing stuff that we hadn't seen before. Now stuff like the And One tour and the professional dunkers and whatnot, it's kind of spoiled. It's spoiled contest dunks in a sense. When we see the guys in the NBA do it, we've seen a version of that or something better on some outdoor court or some random gym somewhere on the internet. But you weren't exposed to dunks like that at the time, and Vince was doing stuff you'd never seen before. The other big part of it, I think, was that he hit his dunks on the first attempt.
Yep.
I think he stopped for one. For one of them, he like ran up, was gonna jump, but he didn't actually take off. And then he did it again, but he was nailing his first dunks. I think that makes a huge difference in terms of the you're talking about the crowd energy and whatnot. And then also it was a killer contest all around, like what T Mac was doing and Steve Francis. I mean, it was just really it was a fun show, and to see these guys keep one upping each other, just kind of like it built to that. But the long story short, it was because of Vince's athleticism. It's because it remains kind of unparalleled.
I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if you'll agree with me. I feel like I don't want to. I'm 35, so like I don't want to talk like I'm like some kind of old person here, but I feel like a lot of the younger
We're getting there.
audience,
We're getting there.
you're right? A lot of the younger audience of the NBA, I think, don't really understand like the history of the league, and I think that was quite apparent with the Last Dance that came out, just in terms of realizing how important
Wow.
Michael
Yeah.
Jordan was, and just that team, and not only that, but the other cinema figures around it, like from the Houston Rockets, the New York Knicks, all those players in that time period.
Yeah.
Do you think the I guess the television networks do you think they do a good enough job of really showing the history of the league? Because I feel like that's a missing component in the presentation these days in terms of kind of presenting kind of the history of the league. Because I don't know. I remember just growing up, that was shown. Like there's like an appreciation of
True. Yeah.
the players in the past. Like even in the '90s, they did the whole I forget the top 50 players of the league.
Yeah, so the anniversary.
The anniversary, yeah, and it's just this year is the I think the 75th anniversary. So I'm wondering, I hope that there's just a movement towards history, and I don't feel that's been representative. Lately. I don't know if you agree with that.
I agree completely with that. I'm obviously biased, but I do agree that not enough is made of like the league's history. And you talk about like television, TV presentations and whatnot. They don't show that much of it. To some degree, like what's their motivation to show a lot of it? Better to hype up the players of today and sell them to a growing audience and whatnot. But when we saw Giannis dominating in the finals, people were making the comparisons to Shaq and whatnot, and then every once in a while, because he dropped 50 in a finals game like that, people were making comparisons to Wilt, and I was pulling my hair out. I was just going crazy, thinking like it's great that we're having these conversations, but like then actually have the conversation. You can't just throw out stuff like comparisons to Will Chamberlain like lightly. Obviously, it's a testament to what Giannis is doing, but yeah, I think there's not enough is made of this. This year you mentioned it's obviously the 75th anniversary, and I've heard that they are going to put out some kind of top 75 players list. So I'm sure you'll hear more and more about it. I know I'm working in consultation with the league on the video history series that they're putting together. So they're doing more this year, certainly, to amplify the anniversary. So we'll give an opportunity for people to learn more about the origins and about some of the players I was naming, like the Jerry Wests and Oscar Robertsons. These people might know the names, but I don't think they really appreciate just how good they were, or they dismiss them and say, they wouldn't be good today, which I think is a trash argument, because it's the talent. It's their talent that really made them who they were. And if you were to bring them to today with today's tools and whatnot and knowledge, the talent would still be there. So they would just be that much better. I don't know. That's just kind of how I approach it.
Yeah,
but I think you're going to see more this year. I hope of hoops history.
I hope so too. I think that'd be an awesome thing. I wanted to ask you, since you're based in Canada and you have vast experience covering the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah.
I think when being based in America, I don't think there's appreciation of the growth of the game of basketball in Canada. So can you kind of, I don't know, this question, it might be unfair just for you to summarize in this, in a short period. But I want to ask because I'm so curious. Since the Raptors became, in addition to the league in the '90s to now when the Raptors, won the title most recently, can you kind of talk about the growth of the game in that country? Just I remember this, a couple of years ago, I think the international team came out for Canada. You just saw this a massive improvement compared to what it was like decades prior to that. So
Yeah,
can you kind of just speak to the growth of the game there into some context compared to it's the game of basketball compared to like baseball or hockey?
that's one measurement you just used that I think is a good one to kind of encapsulate the growth of the game. I think the NBA has, I think outside of the U.S., the most second place in terms of players in the NBA is Canada. I mean, there's more Canadians than any other country except for America. And they're almost all young up and coming guys. Like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander,
Yeah.
Dort, and whatnot. I guess Wiggins as well. But so that's one measure. Like obviously, by producing all these NBA talent, is obviously that there's more players coming up in this country. From a fan perspective, it's been an unbelievable, almost like night and day difference. And I think the Raptors 2019 title run really took things to another level. So when the Raptors first started in '95, there were basketball fans in Canada, but not many. And I think the ones who were following the Raptors were those were the basketball fans in Canada. So the small, kind of loyal, Napoleonic complex kind of group. And then when Vince Carter came along, there was a big soar in popularity. I think a lot of people forget for a couple years there, he was the most popular player in the league, leading all-star vote getter, top jersey sales, all that kind of stuff. So that obviously translated to more and more fans coming on board. But, when Vince left, there's some good years. There's some good years with Chris Bosh and whatnot, but the Raptors became pretty irrelevant for a while there. It was ugly. The Bargnani years, whatever you want to call it. I defend that pick. That's a different story. And then when you saw the recent run with DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, when that kind of backcourt really took off and the Raptors started reaching the playoffs more and more, Toronto, great sports town, bandwagon sports town though. So like the Raptors had to be a winner to get all these people on board to follow them. And I think the same is true of the national basketball audience in Canada. And then, that championship run, there was 3 million, 2 million people who came out for the championship parade. So that kind of shows you just how far things had come. I mean, that was unthinkable when the team first started playing. It was unthinkable 5 years ago. And then to see it happen just a couple of years ago was pretty impressive. And now basketball is one of the most popular sports in Canada. I don't think it'll top hockey anytime soon. I don't know if it ever will, but you see it rising along with soccer. In terms of like the number of kids playing the sport, it's one of the fastest growing in the country for sure, and it's only going to keep going that way.
So I'll let you go with this final question. The GO conversation gets brought up all the time, and you have great perspective in this. And I feel like when people compare different eras, they just have recency bias and their emotions get involved. And I don't think it's a very nuanced and kind of difficult conversation to have. So in your mind, when trying to compare eras, instead of asking you, okay, like who's better, Michael Jordan or MJ, I want to ask you, what is the criteria of breaking down who is better in what era? What should be considered and what should be thrown out and not considered at all?
Well, I mean, if you're talking like just measuring like on the court, who's the best player, a pretty good one is just to you put them in context of the people they were playing against. That's like kind of step one. So like go back to Wilt or someone like Bill Russell. You have to consider like if someone's averaging 50 points a game, if Wilt Chamberlain's playing the Celtics going against Bill Russell, this great defender, and gets 55 rebounds. We can't dismiss that just because it was 1962 or whatever. You know what I mean? So I think how they performed in their era really does matter. Then the second step you do is kind of like I was talking about before. Like you do almost want to, or it's hard not to because it's part of the conversation. How would they translate to today? How would they compare? And that's where I think most people would translate pretty well when we talk about the greats. Like I said, like Oscar Robertson would still be crazy talented. Dr. J, his hops are still there, and he's still just as smart of a player. He'd be even smarter today with more access to the information and whatnot. But maybe a guy like George Mikan, who was like fundamentally sound, but his biggest skill was that he was just bigger than everyone. Maybe he wouldn't stack up as well today as someone like Wilt would, who also brought the athleticism and brought some of those skills that you would need. So you look around like at the all around skill set, basically, and then the other part of it is like influence, and that's where I think the conversation. That's one of the reasons it gets whittled down to two names, Jordan and LeBron. Because if we were talking pure basketball skills, I do think you'd have to include Wilt. I do think you'd have to include Russell just for his defensive ability and the way he won. But really, when it comes to influence, nobody can touch Jordan and LeBron. And when you look even closer, you mentioned recency bias, and I know it's the reason why people go for LeBron. But when it comes to shaping the game of basketball, shaping the NBA, nobody touches Michael Jordan. It's not a contest. And I think that has to be factored in when people talk about the GOAT. I really think it does. Also, the guy never lost in the finals and things like that. I think those are like it's a close contest. So you kind of you have to pick which of these little trivia bits you enjoy the most. You know what I mean? And something like the finals argument is one of the reasons why people gravitate towards Jordan, and I'm definitely one of them. But the biggest reason, though, sorry, I'm ranting here. The biggest reason being because he completely changed the NBA. A lot of people have changed the game of basketball. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird they changed the league as well to a degree. But what Jordan did with the NBA, taking it from a kind of second-rate league to an extent, at least compared to other pro major sports, football, baseball, whatever. And Jordan brought it into this multi-billion-dollar enterprise, global enterprise. And I don't think, I don't think we should forget that or treat it lightly.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think MJ is the greatest of all time. My concern is that as time goes on, his legacy will somewhat be forgotten. And I guess maybe that's just a victim of just time passing in general, just because
which is natural to some degree, right?
Yeah, it is. I think The Last Dance helped, but it's one of those things. Until you've kind of lived in that era, I don't think people understand how much of a global star Michael Jordan was. And just when you saw him on the court, it was like a privilege to see him. And with LeBron, no disrespect, he's a great player, but I don't feel it's not like I don't know. I don't feel privileged when I'm watching him play.
Justin,
yeah.
I wonder how much of that is you seeing Jordan through the eyes of like a 13-year-old and seeing LeBron through the eyes of a 35-year-old man.
Maybe.
Now.
Good point.
I think about that all the time. I'm like, I'm so impressed by the players today. There's so many cool players. There's so many great ones. But I don't have that kind of like feeling that I had with a lot of the guys like the Vinces or whoever growing up. You mentioned like Iverson, like those guys, Amari Stoudemire when he started out. And part of that is just like you get older. I think that's at least a small part of it. But yeah, like Jordan, I don't think he can be touched. And to a degree, like you're going back to your very first question, like to a degree, I didn't even realize. I knew Jordan was huge, obviously. But when you start really doing the research, and a lot of the research I was doing was like reading old articles from the day, you really got a sense of how much this guy was, as you alluded to, like a guy who walked into the room and everybody's head turned.
I will say that ooh and ah feeling. I think I have that for Steph Curry. Like,
good example.
Yeah. It's one of those things where he's like a musician, like just on the court, and just the shot he takes. I haven't seen anybody takes those shots before, and I think
I have that feeling for Scotty Barnes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Somebody did one. Good start.
Well, I think with LeBron, I mean, I remember him in high school, and I remember just checking him out, just on my local high school computer, just in terms of his days in Ohio, and I was in awe of him. But it's I don't know that with Michael Jordan, it just felt like he was a global sports star, and I think with LeBron, he's a great basketball player, and I think where LeBron overtakes Michael in a different category is just his impact on social issues. And
No question, no question.
yeah,
Like Jordan has that famous quote: "Republicans buy
yep,
sneakers too." Yeah, LeBron has taken a more a bigger stance, certainly, than Jordan in that regard.
yep,
No question.
yeah,
Also, the longevity.
that's
It's
true.
like at some point, if you like, at some point, the argument will come down to numbers, and by virtue of having a career twice as long, potentially, LeBron will always have the upper hand in that regard. A lot of that is due to technology and training techniques and nutrition and things we know now, and also because LeBron's. It's no shame to be second behind Michael Jordan in the conversation of the greatest of all time. Yeah,
Well, a lot of people would put Kobe, certainly ahead of both of them. This
Kobe
is
was an amazing scorer, an
yeah,
amazing scorer.
agreed.
Yeah, for some reason though, he falls short of that tier.
He does.
He was a great defender too, so I don't know why, but maybe it's because of I don't know, the volume of the shots. I'm not sure.
Right. And I think there's some like ugly playoff moments where, it's
Right,
evident
right.
that he did not perform at all. So that's kind of like a black mark on his record. But yeah, it's a fascinating conversation to have because I just think that as the league evolves, it's just going to be interesting how kind of that GOAT conversation takes place now with like, especially, I don't want to put too much pressure on him, but with Luca, we've never seen a player like that with that caliber of skill so early. So
To be doing that at that age, yeah,
yeah,
like if he continues on that track, yeah, yeah. So the conversation has to be able to evolve. And like people
yeah,
like you and I have to be able to be willing to say
agreed.
a name other than Jordan, you know.
Yeah, of course.
Um, but that's like, I'm not there yet.
Yeah, me either. Agreed. Well, Dave, thank you very much for joining the show. Really appreciate it. Please let our listeners and viewers know where they can find you on social media and then anything else you're working on and you have any upcoming projects as well.
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Dave Zarum. Dave Zarum, Zarum. Um, like I mentioned with the NBA 75 book, that's available. You can get it on Amazon. Probably have a copy here. This bad boy.
Sweet.
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon, wherever books are sold. You can get it. You can get it at the library too. Go check it out at the library. I think that's pretty cool. And like I said, the paper book edition is coming out next fall, and it's going to have some updated chapters, including one on the bubble, probably one on Chris Paul. People can tweet me and suggest updated chapters they want to read, but we have a pretty good idea of where we'll go with it. Yeah, and I got some other projects in the works. I mentioned that NBA video series. You can look out for that. I'm not sure where it will surface, but some things on the go. But yeah, check out the book is what I would say. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the chat. Really enjoy it. And again, thanks for coming on the show. Be on the lookout for that updated NBA 75, and we'll be staying tuned for that NBA video series as well. Looking forward to checking that out too.
Thanks, man. Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, Dave.